All right, good afternoon, class, or in my case, good morning, 1:30 a.m. I'd get some time tonight to be able to make the lesson. So it's actually pretty short today as we finish up 4.2. You guys hopefully have been able to grasp the concepts. I haven't been doing a lot of example problems like I would if I were there, just simply because it's a little difficult to do from home. So I would have liked to have had more lessons videoed before I left, but just with late news of us having to induce early, I wasn't able to have as much done. So that being said, when I get back on Monday, we'll be able to go back and review anything that you guys have questions about in 4.1 and 4.2. Probably practice some of those example problems that you see in the book just to go over a little bit. I actually have developed a couple other like little mini experiments that we can do based on the data that we did from those surveys at the beginning of the class. So we'll be able to use some of that data and be able to compare some things and just kind of so you guys understand how experiments work. So as we wrap up 4.2, we'll be talking about the final things that can be done as you set up an experiment and how you prepare for an experiment. And then hopefully you guys are understanding it okay. I haven't gotten a ton of emails as far as questions go. So hopefully you guys are understanding it all right. Hopefully that 4.1 quiz went all right. It's kind of difficult not being there to be able to communicate with you guys, but I will be back next week. So you guys only have one more day without me. I know you guys must be just struggling to get by. Baby Aria is a little fussy and her mom is in bed. So I thought maybe since she was not wanting to lay down, I could show her to you guys today. So it's my little girl. She's she got her eyes open a little bit for you. Got some fat cheeks. But yeah, so that's Aria. So she'll be here. We're doing stats with us today. Oh, she just threw up on me. Oh well, I'll deal with it. All right, let's go ahead and get started. I'll hide my video. Stop video. All right. So these are the things you guys have already done, okay, or things we've already talked about. Comparison is using a design that compares two or more treatments. Most treatments we usually do, or most experiments will have two treatments, but you can have more. Random assignment, so making sure that you are breaking your experimental units or your individuals up randomly and randomly choosing who gets which treatment rather than creating bias or by having other variables contribute to your results. You want to have a control, which is keeping other variables the same for all groups. Okay, so you're trying to make these two groups look as similar as possible outside of the variable that you are testing or the treatment that you're testing. And then replication, using enough experimental units in each group so that you can actually effectively see the differences in the two treatments. Okay, so hopefully those four make sense for how you design your experiment, but we're gonna move on now. So another way that you can have your experiments designed is through a completely randomized design. That means that there's no variable that or anything that you're considering when you're grouping you're assigning your treatments to your experimental units. Okay, so your experimental units are assigned to the treatments completely by chance. There's no human element in there. Okay, so you have your experimental units, random assignment for which groups they go into, and those groups get different treatments. Okay, so for instance, if I were to take our class, I'd randomly put you into group 1 and group 2, and there'd be no variables determining which group you go into. It's just I grab stats class, randomly throw half of you in group 1, half of you in group 2. So I'm not accounting for the different variables that could also affect your outcomes. So for instance, if I ask the question, who likes football? Okay. I'm going to get a group of people who are athletes or just like watching football. I have a group of people who've never watched a game in their life, group of people who may or may not have some kind of factors that would influence that answer, right? So without acknowledging any of those variables, you could be saying, hey, it's totally random by chance. Statistically, this should be accurate, but you also have a chance of having one group very strongly. And that example doesn't work super well, showing why this can have issues. But if you were to say instead, we'll go back to the pill, right? you want to see which pill works better than another. So you have two different treatments, treatment 1 being pill A, treatment 2 being pill B, and they just randomly go into these two groups. Well, you could randomly have group 2 be a much healthier group of people, or a group of people much more susceptible to improvements, right? Just by random chance. So a totally randomized design can have some issues, but it can assure that there's no type of bias in your group. If your experimental units are all already very similar to each other, then when you split them up into two groups, it shouldn't make an issue. But if your experimental units are different from each other, just completely randomizing can have issues. So then you're able to compare the response variable. What I like much more is randomized block designs. Now, a block is when you take your experimental units, or the individuals that you're actually studying, and you know what types of groups they have and what characteristics they are. Okay. So you get your blocks set up and what treatments you want to apply to them. And then in a randomized block design, you are randomizing which people go into each block. Okay. So I'll read it out just word for word. In a randomized block design, the random assignment of experimental units to treatments is carried out separately within each block. Okay. So you've got these two blocks and then the treatments branch off from there. So I'll show you an example of it. All right. A little note that I found to be interesting as I was writing through this, I want to read it off to you guys. A randomized block design allows us to account for the variation in the response that is due to the blocking variable. So for instance, if I've got a block that I want to make sure maybe block A, they all have diabetes before I give this pill, and block B are all people that don't have diabetes. Well, I'm going to separate those two into blocks, right? So I've got maybe 20 people with diabetes, 20 people without. I separate them first, and then from those two blocks, I randomly assign who gets the placebo pill and who gets the actual pill. And then I go into block B, the people without diabetes, who gets the placebo pill, who gets the actual pill, right? So it's called randomized block design. There's a graph or image I'm going to show you in a minute that'll help explain it. When these are done wisely, like where you're actually accounting for the different variables that might impact the responses that you get and the data that you get, it's much more effective at collecting data and seeing differences in your treatments and evidence in your treatments. So I strongly advocate using this method in your experiments, and I know that the AP test will as well. So here's an example, okay? So in this question, they're trying to find out which keyboard helped you have a higher typing speed. So they had 10 volunteers, and 4 of which use smartphones and 6 of which do not. Okay, so they're saying these people might automatically have quicker typing speeds, right? If they use smartphones or if they don't. So what they did is they separate them into pre-existing blocks before it starts. This part here is not random assignment, okay? They split them up intentionally. However, when you take the block and you split it into the two keyboards, keyboard A and keyboard B, they randomly assigned members from this group or experimental units from this group to keyboard A and randomly assigned 2 members from this group to keyboard B. That is the randomized block design that we talked about, okay? Then they also do the same thing with non-smartphone users. So they randomly assigned 3 to keyboard A, randomly assigned 3 to keyboard B. Now that they've done that, they can compare the typing speed among non-smartphone users who use keyboard A and B, and they can compare the typing speed among smartphone users who use keyboard A and B. And say, for instance, we saw people that weren't smartphone people. They all found keyboard A, they had a faster typing speed. And then smartphone users also, when they use keyboard A, had a faster typing speed. So if we see that both groups have a faster typing speed than we use keyboard A, then we can probably assume that this keyboard's better. However, if we had something like keyboard B found was faster typing speeds for smartphone users compared to keyboard A for non-smartphone users, you may not draw the same comparison. You might say, oh, well, keyboard B is preferred by these people, whereas keyboard A would be preferred by non-smartphone users, right? So you'll be able to compare a lot more. And maybe you say it didn't really make a difference. Certain people were just faster based on what they were used to, right? So you're able to compare your results and get much more accurate data, okay? So your evidence is much clearer. Finally, a matched pairs design. Now, this one can be a little tricky. I know my class last year kind of struggled with it, but hopefully I can explain it a little bit better this year. It's a common experimental design, so this is done pretty frequently, comparing two treatments. So you might have pill A, pill B. They use blocks of size 2. So for instance, if I were to take my class of AP Stats students, I'm going to break you into 14 and 14. I have 14 different groups of 2, where one of you got pill A, one of you got pill B, and I compare you 2 together. I move to my next group or my next pair. And then we might have Maru and Carter are that group. And I give Maru pill A and Carter pill B. Then I go on to my next group and I give Eddie pill A and Maddie pill B, right? And each of those individual pairs, we're looking for differences and comparisons between the two. So that's going to be a matched pairs design where you're matching these two together. And those experimental units. So like, for instance, I should pick people who are very similar to each other, have variables very close to each other. So maybe 2 people that are on dance team. So like Chloe and Sarah, right? Those 2 would be a pair. And then maybe like Yurley and I don't know who's Yurley's friends. Yurley and Maru, right? You guys hang out somewhat, I believe. You guys could be a pair, right? And as you go through Eddie and Trevor, you have these things that are paired together because they are similar to each other. And that is your individual groups that you're studying. Okay. So those are called matched pair designs. It's similar to the blocks. It's just with different forms. Okay. So it's a different way to do it if you're trying to make comparisons on either smaller groups that are more detailed, or if you're trying to look at variation in certain variables between these 2 groups. Okay. So you're trying to get as close to possible between these 2 different individual units or experimental units, and then you look for differences between them. I hope that makes sense. We'll go over it more on Monday. Like I said, a lot of this 4.2 stuff can be tricky unless you actually do it. So 4.2 we'll really be going over Monday and just kind of doing some of this stuff, because just reading it and hearing it isn't going to be the best way to learn it, but it's just the way it has to be since I'm not there. So luckily I'll be back Monday. We'll be able to practice this stuff, and hopefully you guys will understand a lot better. So if you can do these 5 things, you should be feeling good about 4.2. If not, study up, do your homework, and we should be able to be good to go. So explain the concept of confounding and how it limits the ability to make cause and effect conclusions. Distinguish between an observational study and an experiment. Identify the explanatory and response variables in each type of study. Identify the experimental units and treatments in an experiment. And then describe the placebo effect and the purpose of binding an experiment. Finally, these last 4, you can pause and read if you want to. I'm getting tired. I'm going to go to bed. But these should be everything you should know how to do at this point. So try to look through these. Make sure you understand them. Your books are really useful tools. Like I said, they're really an outline for the AP exam. It's a great tool. Feel free to dive into it, understand it, look through those example problems. I really think it will help you guys, especially since I can't be there. But you should be good to go. So I know this was a shorter video. Hopefully it all makes sense. Okay. Hopefully it all makes sense, but we'll be able to get right into practicing it more on Monday and just kind of understanding this stuff. And then we still have 4.3 and I believe 4.4 to go. It's a big chapter. Like I said, covers 12 to 17% of the AP exam. So we're going to want to understand it best we can. Or is that probability that covers 12 to 17%? I don't remember. All right. Anyways, next, go ahead and do your homework for the day. It is posted in Google Classroom right below this video, right below the link. So go ahead and do that. And I hope you guys do great. And then I will see you Monday. Let me know if you have any questions. I have been grading your tests, doing really well. I think you guys expected that. You guys did very well on this test. So enjoy the video. See ya.